open up today just by going through each of the panelists and asking them to say a little bit about themselves in just a couple of minutes and tell us what you mean when you use the words science and spirituality. And we'll start with you, Dr. Lewis.
Sounds good. Can everybody hear me? Well, I think I'm supposed to be the neuroscience guy on the panel. So in one of my particular interests, the intersection of neuroscience and human experience, when we talk about something like spiritual experience, the questions that we're interested in are, can we look in the brain and see what gives rise to these kinds of behaviors or experiences? If we can, does that tell us anything about the experience or behavior from knowing something about the brain and how it works? So in response to your question, what do I mean by science or spirituality? I think science, I would mean, is the human endeavor whereby we invent stories about how the world might be, and then we look to see whether, in fact, it is that way or not, which is not what people do most of the time. Spirituality, from the perspective of neuroscience, would be kind of a broad label for an amalgam of brain functions, all of which individually and collectively bias people to suppose that there are supernatural forces at large in the world. For instance, people occupy an environmental niche which is constituted chiefly by other people. So birds live in trees and the air, fish live in the water, people live in communities of other people. All of them have an interiority, have wants, desires, and agenda. So as you go through the day, your brain is constantly thinking, what does this person want? What is her state of mind? What should I do to please her? What does she want? What is the motivation here? What do these people want from me? What am I supposed to do? And that tendency is so overwhelming, because that is our environmental niche, that it's almost impossible for people to stop doing that. So they're very inclined to think, why won't the car start? What does it want me to do? What does the remote want of me? What does the weather want? What do the seasons want? What does the god of fertility want? What do these natural forces want? It's very natural to think that the world is imbued with purpose, desire, agenda, and things that it wants of us and that we should give to it. So that's one of the modules, say. So from a neuroscience perspective, spirituality would be the sum total of all of these different modules, which dispose us to believe that the world is alive with supernatural forces.
Thank you very much, and that explains why after the Raiders win, I don't wash that shirt, and I make sure to wear it the next day. Dr. Keshgegian, same question.
All right, I have a text, because I like to have texts. I'm a teacher. How do we know? How do I know? How do you know? For me, that's a fundamental question in this conversation between science and spirituality. It's about knowing and different ways of knowing. It's about truth and different ways of apprehending truth. We live in a world in which scientific ways of knowing tend to dominate. Such empirical approaches to knowledge proceed by experiment and demonstration. Show me, prove it, these are the bottom lines. And at the risk of being simplistic, especially among scientists proceed by posing a hypothesis, conducting experiments, and hopefully proving their hypothesis, and then applying the knowledge. The nature of such empirical knowledge is that it can be encountered rather directly through our senses, through human reason and rationality, through logic and argument, leading to conclusions. And the goal is often a type of mastery, to know so we can use or apply such knowledge. In its more practical form, such knowledge is assessed by its use value. It is as good as what it can produce. Empirical scientific knowledge isn't wrong or bad. Indeed, it's necessary and useful for living in the world. But it is limited. It's just one kind of knowing. Another way of knowing is what some call contemplative knowledge. Contemplative knowledge does not emphasize proof or demonstration so much as encounter, reception, and experience. These involve the whole person, not only senses and rationality, but emotions and spirit. Contemplative ways of knowing embrace the notion that ultimately reality and life itself are mystery. We can approach this mystery, we can relate to it, but we do not need or want to master it or reduce it to anything else. The goals of contemplative knowing are relationship with mystery and life abundant for all of creation and all in creation. For me, both types of knowing have their place and their role. It's not a matter of choosing one against the other. However, because science and empirical ways of knowing are so dominant in the post-Enlightenment world, it's important to make room for contemplative knowing, to accord it status, and to honor our need for it. Among the sciences, I, as a theologian, am most drawn to physics, in part because it deals with subjects I'm interested in, such as time, energy, nature of the universe, but also because it comes up to the limits, I think, of empirical science. Physics gestures towards an ultimate mystery and unknowability. There are lots of other kinds of ways of knowing too, but I'm going to point to one more, and this is a type of knowing shared by both science and spirituality, and that's imaginative knowledge, or a type of dreaming and speculation. Such knowledge is good for the imagination and for exercising our imaginations, dreaming, envisioning, asking what if and why not, stretching ourselves to our limits and beyond. There is, however, a temptation and a potential danger in this way of knowing also, to collapse speculation into proclamation, to render our imaginings as given. So I want to end with what I consider problematic for both science and spirituality, and that is certainty. Knowing that leads to certainty is dangerous in any field. Our practices of knowing will serve us best if they help us live with and befriend ambiguity and provisionality, which for me are at the heart of faith, in which seeing is not believing, but believing is seeing.
Thank you. Dr. Krasny, tell us what you mean when you use the word science and spirituality.
Well, actually, I wrote a book sort of trying to figure out what this floating signifier, as I call it, spirituality, even means. I think it's come to mean a search for something transcendent or something numinous or some kind of higher truth. But science, we understand, is always a kind of empirical inquiry. And the problem and the sort of clash of these two civilizations, which are often seen as literally two kinds of ways of thinking in two languages. There's a whole famous Snow-Levis controversy which suggests that they are literally and figuratively two languages, is that one bases itself on empiricism and the other has what a friend and colleague of mine named Jacob Needleman, whom I'm certain probably many of you are familiar with, calls inner empiricism, as opposed to the external empiricism. That is, what is in your subjective or inner consciousness, or landscape, or what kind of leap of faith you make, or what you intuitively or through some kind of sensory process of your consciousness take to be a higher truth, or aspire to as a higher truth. I came out on this as a kind of doubter and skeptic, at least on the spiritual side, because I didn't find the ability or find the resources to make, I suppose, what you could call a leap of faith. I finally had to settle on the notion that I was agnostic, which carries with it a kind of woman-headedness to many people. I always, in fact, recall Mort-Sahl's line that a family of agnostics moved in a neighborhood and someone burned a question mark on their lawn. But to me, and to just piggyback on what was just said before, the idea of uncertainty was something that I found more and more compelling, or the sort of certainty of uncertainty, which sounds paradoxical. And I wanted to get to that notion of spirituality through the scientific, and I couldn't. I wanted to get through it intuitively, or some leap of faith, or some mysterious way. And mystery is part of the spiritual, I believe. Through some sacred way, through some sense of grace, or at least approximating what we think of as a notion of grace. And found myself simply unable. And so I became envious. Thus the title of my last book, Spiritual Envy. And my friend, the novelist Isabel Allende, said, it's one of the 7 sins, but the only 2 that are really interesting are lust and gluttony. So I've been on a quest to try to bring some sense of synthesis in my own mind between what we think of as spiritual and what we think of as the scientific. I even moderated at Harvard a few years ago something called Science and the Spiritual Quest, which was funded by Templeton, a philanthropist who funds these kind of things. It was a major event held at the Trinity Church at Harvard, And I came away hearing some of the most really renowned international scientists in the world, and was even more confused about the sense of how these converge and how we can make a connection between something that is so intuitive on the one hand and non-empirical, at least in terms of external empiricism, and the outer empiricism. But I don't think they are antithetical. I think you can be a person of faith, belief, and spirituality, and also be a scientist. In fact, I know you can be. Too many, I think, see them as being antithetical or mutually exclusive. And I think they can work together in a number of ways that almost strike me as being, if not harmonious, close to being harmonious. And that's the convergence that I continue to find myself looking for.
Thank you very much.